What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another daily drop brought to you by TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm THS staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me as he always does is our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we're here to talk about a specific UNC basketball-related topic, as we're going to be talking about some of the milestones that Armando Bacot could achieve next season and what'll be his fifth and final year in Chapel Hill. So interesting conversation coming up. Obviously, he's a guy already who's the all-time leader in rebounds at North Carolina and all-time leader in career double-doubles, setting those milestones last year. So AJ, I know you've developed a list and have a piece kind of coming out on this as well. So talk to me about some of the milestones and some of the things that are, for lack of a better word, kind of in reach for Armando Bacot going into his final season in Chapel Hill.
There's a lot of stuff. It's not so much just the records, like he could become the all-time leader in such and such. It's how close he can get in some really interesting areas. And I'm going to start with scoring. Mm-hmm. He right now he's at 1,810 points. He's not going to catch Tyler because he's 1,072 behind Tyler. It's not going to happen. And it's good that it shouldn't happen because Tyler will keep that for a long time, and kind of that's his spot. He kind of owns that top spot as a college Tar Heel, in my opinion. But in the last 2 years, Armando's averaged 572 points per season. So if he gets 572 this year, he'll be at 2,382, which would put him third on the all-time scoring list behind Tyler and Phil Ford. Mm-hmm. So think about that for a minute. If you're a stat consumer like I am, I'm a guy that loves to look at stats, and I love to look at all-time leaders and just kind of look down that line. If you're going to if you're in 4 years from now, open up Carolina's record book or go online, and everything's online now, and you want to know, hey, look at Carolina's top scorers of all time. You're going to see our Tyler Hansbrough up top, like, well, of course. Phil Ford, of course. If you skip over the third guy, you would see names like Jameson, et cetera. The third guy could be Armando Bacot. Think about that. Now, the fifth year helps, but right now at 1,810, I think he's 14th. And he averaged 22 minutes a game his first 2 years. So it's not like he's a 4-year starter or 4-year 32-minute-a-game guy. So the fifth year obviously changes things. And I will say this, as much as people think that the numbers are going to be so skewed because of COVID, the COVID fifth year, I'm very confident the NCAA is going to pass a fifth year of eligibility here pretty soon. So guys like Armando will be around for the foreseeable future. There will be fifth year guys all the time that have a chance to really change their records with a lot of programs. So remember, there was a period where guys could only play 3 years. And then when they started being allowed to play 4 years in the 70s, that kind of skewed some of the record books, but we got used to that. And we'll get used to guys playing 5 years once it happens. But the scoring, to me, to see him third will be very, very interesting. I'm not saying it will end up that way, but it's likely he scores 572 points this year. So with that, I think he probably ends up third.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's, again, you mentioned it earlier, but we've kind of got, obviously you have, and myself as well, have gotten to cover him since he was a true freshman. I'll never forget the ACC tournament in Greensboro right before COVID hit, and kind of voices in his head comments and all that stuff that he kind of dealt with his freshman year. And then to see where he is now and how much he's developed, because there's this, essentially we were talking about this before we came on, he could end up, top 5 at least in a lot of different categories. Is guaranteed to leave North Carolina as the all-time leader in rebounds and career double-doubles. And like you said, with that fifth year, been able to stat pad that even more this year. It's going to be hard pressed, I know you mentioned that fifth year is probably coming. Still, it's going to be hard pressed for guys to come in and break those records down the line, especially really talented guys, because, it's still, the NBA is still an option for a lot of these guys. So you expect, guys that are really, really good forwards or good centers for North Carolina may leave early, and certain different circumstances may not lead to some of these guys in the future that are really, really talented staying for 5 years. So it's going to be hard for some of these guys to break Bacot's record. But I think there was a narrative going around last year from a lot of people and fans that he didn't really improve. And that, to me, that was just ridiculous. His game and his fluidity on the block is just night and day, not even from a year or two ago, but from his freshman year, man. Just the development that he's had, so much more fluid down there. He makes these difficult post moves look very easy. And I think that gets in some people's heads of like, well, that's like an easy post move to do because he's making it look easy. No, he's making it look easy because he's really good, So I think there's a little bit of a misconception about his development because I think his offensive game and some of his instincts down there have just improved tenfold since he got to campus, AJ. It's night and day.
His moves on the block and outside the lane, he had that dribble move from the baseline that he showed last year, that 3 dribble move, far more decisive than previously. Mm-hmm. And especially in situations where he had single defender. What changed for him, he didn't score over 20. He didn't hit the 20-point mark after the NC State game in January when he actually became the all-time leading rebounder. But he got beaten. He's been beaten up by people so much. Today, you go look at our board today. People are like, well, we don't really need another Armando, and I'm okay with him coming back. But yeah, it's really I don't get it at all because he was a product of an offense that just increasingly played in sand last year. So teams knew the sets. Then they knew that there were 2 guys out there that most often weren't going to go off and come close to it. And there was another guy out there that could go 2 for 15. Mm-hmm. So the 2 consistent offensive weapons that they had were Armando and RJ. Well, RJ had the ball. So he's going to do whatever he does. But if you take Armando out and you take your chances with the other 2, and you figure that one guy's going to go 2 for 15, if he doesn't, you might lose, but the odds are pretty good he's going to have a really bad game shooting the ball, you win. So I covered all those games. I watched teams double him in a variety of ways. And it was when everybody was committed to the double. And sometimes even a triple by dropping a guard with a ball swipe or something. That's when his numbers dropped significantly. And he also had a couple of he had that one game in there where he didn't play much because he got injured. And I just think that there were periods where he was really frustrated. He wouldn't get the ball. There was a period there, I think it was in the Florida State game at Florida State, where he basically became a screener. And you could see the frustration. But he also understood why. He wasn't mad at teammates. It was just like, man, we are in a really bad cycle here. We can't get out of. And the evidence of not being able to get out of it was the kinds of shots he got. Very few shots he got where he had a chance to really make a move. He would get a ball on the block. He'd try to get his hip on someone. He'd pound it once and go up and score, and there'd be a double over him, and the ball wouldn't get to the rim, or he'd get fouled sometimes. I don't think we'll see as much of that next year. I believe that the way the team has been constructed, that it's going to be a lot more difficult to cheat defensively the way teams were on the sets because a couple of guys couldn't score, and then doubling their best player, Armando. So that will change, and because of that, he's got a really good chance of finishing third in scoring, and a lot of other stat lines that we can hit on too here in a few minutes about some of the things that he can achieve. A lot of them are rebound oriented, double oriented, obviously, but he could finish. He's 9th right now all time in free throws made at North Carolina. He could finish 3rd. I think that's significant. That's significant. It's a guy going to the line a lot. That's a guy getting other teams in foul trouble. Tyler was so damn good at getting other teams in foul trouble. People think points and rebounds. His free throws were one of the great stats that he brought to the floor because
amazing free throw. Yeah,
he was getting other teams in trouble constantly. They constantly had to go to the bench for their bigs and play guys more against Carolina than they would against Clemson, which tells you what an advantage that is for North Carolina, forcing teams to dig. Armando can do that next year. If he can get in those one-on-one situations and without being doubled, he's going to draw more fouls on the primary defender, on the primary big for the other team. And I think that's a win-win for North Carolina.
Yeah, I think one that could potentially get him, I think an interesting stat, right now he's UNC's all-time leader with 75 games of 10 or more rebounds, had 51 over the last 2 seasons. So 25 or more this season will get him over the 100 mark. for his career. That to me is an interesting stat because it seems like one that's very realistic for him to get over that 100-point mark when you look at what he's averaged over the 2 seasons, because 51 of the last 2 years, that's, essentially 25 a season. Yeah. And with, the team and what we expect him to line up with this year, I think he's going to have a great opportunity to continue to grab 10 or more boards because he's just a double machine at times, for lack of a better word, and a rebounding machine at times. And I think, like I said, with the way Carolina's going to want to play, I think he's going to be really, a guy that is going to have a chance to really clean up the glass like he's done over the past few years, and going to have great opportunity to extend that one as well. So I think that's an interesting one that'll, in my opinion, you would think if he can stay healthy next year and has a type of season we expect him to have, that's probably a milestone that he'll get over, and it'd be pretty cool to get over that 100 mark. I mean, that doesn't happen very often, man.
No, that would be really cool. I think that there's an outside shot for 100 double-doubles.
That would be great. How many double-doubles is he at right now? 68?
68, but remember, when he was healthy as a junior, I think he had 32 that year, which tied with David Robinson, the all-time single-season record. So if they go far in the ACC tournament, they go far in the NCAA tournament, he has a chance to get to 100.
Wow.
That means getting 32. That's a possibility. Another one, which I think is really interesting, is he's second all-time right now with 22 games with 15 or more rebounds. The all-time leader, the only guy in front of him, is Billy Cunningham, who had 38. It's conceivable that Armando going nuts could get to have 17 games this year where he does 15 or more. It's conceivable. It would be very difficult for him to do that.
Yeah, it's probably unlikely, but it could, yeah.
And I wouldn't project it, but it can happen. So if he 17 times gets 15 plus rebounds, he passes Billy Cunningham, who, by the way, only played 3 years. I better say that because someone's going to get on us for not acknowledging that. But he only had 3 years because back then freshmen weren't eligible. But bottom line is these stats are there to be there. They're the all-time stat. You can't take it away from them. And it would be an incredibly impressive accomplishment. Another one, too, which I think is really interesting, and there's two ways of looking at this. And I know people are going to think exactly what I'm thinking right now when I say these numbers, but he already holds the single season record for offensive rebounds per game. This past year, he set that with 4.29, and the year before, he has the second highest total at 4.18. A lot of people are going to say, yeah, but he rebounded 70 of his own misses. That's true.
Still rebounded it.
If he adds to the polish of his offensive game and he converts the first attempt more often, what are his offensive rebound numbers going to be? If he's shooting 65% for the season, is he at 4 offensive rebounds a game? Because he does grab a lot of his own misses. So this isn't so much a record, but that's one stat I'm going to follow very closely because I think it will indicate how efficient his first moves are when he gets the ball down low. If he is scoring right away and not having to put back his own stuff, then that offensive rebound number there is going to go down. And that could affect his overall rebound numbers.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's interesting to think about. A last question I want to ask you before we wrap it up, and we didn't rehearse this, but I've had conversations amongst fans and just, even just on my own time, kind of thinking through this, and in terms of where he ranks all time in terms of Carolina bigs, because with those records, to me, he's got to be up there in some respect. So for me, Hansbrough's number one. I don't necessarily know if he's top 5. I think you can probably make a case for it, maybe, but in your opinion, again, we didn't rehearse this, so I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you think he falls in the top 10? Do you think that's realistic for him when you look at the records he's set? I think the only thing that maybe goes against him compared to some other Carolina bigs is the fact that he hasn't really won much since he's been. I know he reached the title game, but hasn't really won anything since he's been at Carolina. And that's such a big thing when it comes to Carolina. So in my head, I'm like, okay, do you put him above a guy? And I'm just throwing this name out here, like a Kennedy Meeks, who won a national title, had a really good senior, final year. I think it's an interesting conversation to have because of the records that he set and because of the records he could set this year as well.
Well, what's interesting is when you started asking the question, the names that were darting through my mind, Kennedy's name wasn't one of them.
No, and I'm just putting that out there because he's.
I'm going to throw some names of bigs out there. if we judge him right now because he's played his 4 years, and without COVID, he'd be gone. Would he be ahead of Mitch Kupchak? No. Would he be ahead of Sam Perkins? No. Antoine Jameson? No. Tyler? No. Honestly, Tyler Zeller as a junior and senior was probably a better player. He was definitely a better player as a senior. He was ACC Player of the Year.
Bryce Johnson had that spectacular year, his senior year.
Bryce's senior year was incredible. So Armando hasn't taken his game up to that mark just yet.
Sean May.
Not even close. Sean May. I mean, guys, we can keep going on and on here.
It's an interesting really conversation when you look at the records.
Brad Daugherty.
Yeah. He's hard pressed to get in the top 10, and I think that just speaks to the sheer legacy that Carolina has.
Here's the thing. I'm a big baseball guy. I'm a huge baseball guy, and I am a Baseball Hall of Fame snob. And I'm one of those guys that thinks that there are certain dudes, I'm not going to get into this right here, that are in the Hall of Fame that just make me scratch my head, all right? Mm-hmm. They were great in stretches, but they didn't have the prolonged production. To me, it's the accumulation is what's so impressive about baseball. 3,000 hits, 500 home runs, you got to be in, right? So for a guy who approaches things with that mindset, the numbers that he's going to accumulate, if 20 years you look back, some young dude who didn't really watch him starts compiling all-time rankings list, it's going to put Armando way up there.
Yeah.
Because he's going to be in the top 5 of a lot. He's going to be the all-time leader in double-doubles, rebounds, games set with 10 or more rebounds. He could be the one with 15 or more rebounds. He has the top 2 seasons of offensive rebounds per game. It's going to be the top 3 or 4 in points and free throws. And he could be in the top 12 in field goal percentage. And you know what? They have a chance to be really good next year. And what if they get to another Final Four? He could be a 2-time Final Four guy.
That changes up the
In
conversation.
spite of all the losing. So I think history may look at him differently than we do because we're in the now. And sometimes when you're watching a guy in the now, it goes one of 2 ways. People either overvalue them from a historical standpoint or they undervalue. In baseball, Gary Sheffield was undervalued when he was playing, but now that he's done, you look at those stats and you look at him every year and you're like, man, he really was good. Mm-hmm. Then you tend to value him differently as time goes on. I think Armando's going to be a guy like that.
Yeah.
Because we see the losing, because we see some of the stretches that he's been through. We see the frustration. And when you think about, when I think about Bryce's career, I think about a lot of the stuff that he went through to get to where he was as a senior. So there was some of that there. I don't think about that with Jameson. Mm-hmm. I don't think about that with Kupchak. I don't think about that with Perkins. I don't think about that with Brad Daugherty. So, or with Sean. Sean had the broken foot. Otherwise, Sean just became damn good. Zeller had to wait his time and then became damn good. So his is a little bit different. But I think the record books and history is going to view him very, very highly in the history of Carolina basketball.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm a firm believer. We're going to do a separate podcast on this, talking about, and I know you're going to run a piece on it too, talking about, if you had to build a statue kind of outside of the Smith Center, who would it be? And for me, I did a poll on Twitter a couple weeks ago, got a lot of responses from it. And I've always been a believer. I don't consider Armando Bacot a UNC legend. And let me explain this. For me, any program, in my opinion, shouldn't have more than 4 or 5 legends. To me, the word legend should be the cream of the crop. I think a lot of Carolina fans throw the word legend out and they've got like 20, 30 people. And I get it because Carolina has such a strong history. But to me, when I think of a legend, it should be a handful of people that are unmatched and away from the rest. And I just wanted to throw that in there because I think that conversation is going to be interesting. But I do think because of
that's a great pod. That's a great pod. The legend, even go from the statue. Yeah.
It gets thrown around so much. Like, like Marcus Page is a Carolina legend. Like, I don't know if he's a legend. You know what I mean? That's a bold statement. Legend is
not disrespectful to say that he's not. Well, I think what's funny, since you brought it up, I was reading something earlier this morning where some guy's ranking the top 5 quarterbacks for college football next year. And of course, I was curious where he had Drake. He had Drake second, Drake May. And he said, "You're the brother of UNC basketball legend."
Oh, yeah.
And I thought,
see, it just gets thrown around. People said build a statue of Luke May outside. And I was like,
what boulder is this guy living under?
Yeah. You know? I had fans say build a
Luke's jersey's not, there's 50 something jerseys in the rafter, and Luke's will never be up there. And that's no disrespect to Luke. Mm-hmm. It's just the way it is.
Luke's a cult hero in a lot of ways. He's got it from people who watched it. He has a cult-like following because
there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. Anyway, as far as Armando goes, I don't think could there be a statue of him? I think it would only be fair to have that conversation a year from now. Right now, I think it's kind of silly to even think about a statue with Armando. And there's nothing wrong with that, because the guys that I think would be statue worthy are the Jordans and the Rosenbluths of the world. And honestly, I do think North Carolina can have more than 4 or 5 legends.
Yeah, Hansbrough, Dean Smith, Roy Williams. I mean, there's
but even as players, if Jamison came back for his senior year, I think he would have set some marks that Hansbrough had a tough time passing. Mm-hmm. So it's all relative to the time, how long they played, and what the results were, and everything else. But if let's say Armando has an unbelievable year, and nobody can ever afford to double team him, so he just dominates, which I think he's capable of doing. And they win a national championship, and he's the MOP of the Final Four. I think that changes the conversation. But as it stands right now, in May 2023 now. Yeah. But as I said a few moments ago, I think history is going to look at him very fondly because of where he's going to be in all these all-time record lists. I think
the last thing I'll add, I think history is going to look at him differently too, for a different reason as well. I think with NIL opening up as it has, and how college basketball changed over the last couple of years, what Armando's doing on the NIL side of things has been unbelievable. I mean, just the amount of sponsors, and it seems like he has a new one every week. And I think even in terms of what he's doing with NIL, being kind of the pioneer of that at Carolina, because it's a new landscape here. I think history could look back at him in that respect too, of kind of paving the way in some ways to be able to get these deals, because I'm telling you, man, it's unbelievable the amount of NIL deals Armando's done really since the national title game last year.
He could be, and I mean this tongue in cheek in a lot of ways, so the old timers listening will understand. They don't get offended. He could be the Carolina Athletics version of Curt Flood with the stats. Curt Flood was a pretty good player for the Cardinals, St. Louis Cardinals, but everybody who knows baseball back then and understands how free agency came about in sports knows that Curt Flood's one of the most important figures in that process. Yeah. Armando could be known. But when you look at this, there's a diehard Carolina fan that was just born today. Yeah. And maybe he's wired like Jacob Turner. And in 25 years from now, he's doing a podcast with some fat old guy with a big nose who's been around a long time. And maybe he's doing it with Jacob Turner.
Yeah, who knows, right? Man? Maybe I'm the old
You're going to have to start putting on some pounds and got to grow the nose out. And they're having a podcast about Armando Bacot. Yeah. And that kid's going to be like, well, man, look at where he is. He's this and this stat. He's this and this stat. He's this and this stat. And Jacob's going to say, as the wise old Jacob Turner that he is, okay, but I saw him play. He was a really good player, but ...
Yeah. I think that's important too, because I think, for me, I'm a younger guy, so I understand the basketball and history of Carolina. But when people talk about Lenny Rosenbluth, I wasn't there. I wasn't even a thought. So it's hard for me to say because I didn't witness him and didn't see him. You know what I mean? And even other guys going back to the 80s before I was born, early 90s, that I just didn't get to witness at North Carolina. It's a lot different to kind of judge those people when you didn't get a chance to really watch them. You have to really trust what older people say who grew up in that era and had a chance. That, to me, you can get a lot more out of than just, like you said, just looking at these stat books and being like, well, this guy who played back in the 40s had these 10 records for 40 years. That's great, but like, things change. I didn't see it. It's harder to kind of, it's harder to judge players that you didn't witness. You know what I mean? It's a lot different because there's a lot of other nuances and things that determine how good a player was during that time period than just, he's the all-time leader in rebounds and all-time leader. And because, for instance, I think a guy like Armando is also, unfortunately for him, and I think Leakey as well was one of these guys, also has some of the, most career losses in their time at North Carolina too. So there's other stats like that don't look well and won't look well in the next.
In Armando's four seasons, North Carolina has twice not been an NCAA team. Yeah. And the other 2 times were 8 seeds.
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't take away from how good
his second year,
but it will.
His second year, The second year, that team was the only Roy Williams team to ever lose in the first round. So, yeah, I mean, that's why this is.
It'll be very interesting.
Not over. His story isn't over. Jacob, his story isn't over.
No.
We could do this next year and see where it is. And he's been given the gift of a fifth year, like a lot of guys have, which I think is great. I think it's good for college athletics.
Yeah. If Armando wins a national championship, we'll be having a very different conversation about him, because if Carolina is to win a national championship this year, he's going to have a heck of a year in order for them to do so as well. So maybe we'll have the same conversation next year, depending on what happens, AJ. I think it'd be a very interesting one. So we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, though, and get out of here on another episode of the Daily Drop. Appreciate y'all tuning in as always. Make sure to keep it locked to TarHeelIllustrated.com. If you're a premium subscriber, you can sign up for just $8.33 a month. If you're not, head on over to our message boards. We'll have a post on our premium message boards for this YouTube video, for this podcast. Get involved in the chat. Let us know where you think Carolina ranks, or where Armando Bacot ranks in certain categories all time, in your opinion, and we'll have a little conversation about it. Stay tuned for some more daily drops, as we'll be dropping these all throughout the off season as well. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell too. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks.